you know, we can give you further training. So I have just hit record at this moment. So let me just start by introducing myself. My name's Tanya Semerad, and I am the Autism and Significant Cognitive Disability Specialist. I also oversee some paraeducator projects at the Utah State Board of Education. And Tracy and I work hand in hand. You want to introduce yourself real quick, Trace?
Sure. So I'm Tracy Gooley, and I'm the Special Education Assessment Specialist. So I am the program manager over alternate assessments. And then I also oversee accommodations and accessibility in our other statewide assessments like RISE, Utah Aspire Plus, PEEP, KEEP, Acadians, all of those fun things.
Yes. So I'm going to take on most of the portion at the beginning of our training. And then, of course, Tracy is knowledgeable. So Trace, feel free to jump in if I'm missing something. And then also, Tracy will, after we have a short break, will take over with more of the assessment piece. So I'm over instruction and Tracy's over assessment. And there's a reason we're going in this order. And that is because instruction is what really dictates what you're going to do with assessment. And a lot of times people see that backwards. So I might say that a few times. It's not whether the assessment's too hard, so you're going to instruct on alternate standards. It's the other way around. So please keep that in mind. I will say, and Trace, if you can kind of monitor the chat, that would be great. And I'll do the same for you when you're doing your presentation. However, we have saved about 15 minutes for the end for some questions. And I would, if you have like a specific question to a student or a situation, you might want to hold that for the end. If it's sort of a general question that you think would really benefit everybody to ask that question, then in the chat would be great. So let me share my screen, and I will probably pop back and forth between share screen and not, because I like to see your faces, and sometimes it's hard to do that when you're presenting. If any of you have experienced that yet. So I already introduced myself. So here's kind of our learning intentions today. We really want to increase understanding about who is a student with a significant cognitive disability, and then gain knowledge about the alternate standards, achievement standards for mathematics, English language arts, and science. And so that we can help you, guide the educational planning and instruction for these kiddos. Become familiar with instructional resources. And then if we have time, I might go into a little bit of understanding writing standards-based IEPs for students with significant cognitive disabilities. That is in my presentation, but it's also something that you can kind of look at a little deeper if you need to, and we don't have time to do that. I want to tell you that that I did send out, I think, to everybody, and I'm sorry if I missed you. Just go ahead and email me if I missed you. I believe that I sent you some links that you can look at. And so first thing I'm going to do is put in the chat a link to my Padlet, which has, oh, is that my Padlet? Wait, that might be Tracy's Padlet. I want to make sure I'm linked. Yeah, that's Tracy's Padlet. Let me get you a link to my Padlet. You will want Tracy's Padlet as well. But this presentation that I'm doing right now is also in that Padlet. So why does it say Tracy on it? It's so weird.
Are you trying to do the significant cognitive one?
Instructional resources for students with a significant.
Let's see. I'm going to put this in. Sometimes it's weird when like copying and pasting is weird.
Okay, so Tracy
link it, did it.
Okay, all right, okay. So
I think you can get to mine. However,
yeah, you can.
Or get to yours from mine, sorry.
Yes. So some of the documents and things we'll be talking about are in this Padlet link. I did send you an email that has the link, but also Tracy, thank you for putting that in the chat. So like for instance, this right here, this presentation I'm doing is going to be right here. This is also where I will be putting my portion of the training, the recorded training. So just want you guys to be able to know that you can definitely look at everything we're going over today here in this Padlet. Okay, so let me get back to sharing my PowerPoint.
And Tanya, sorry, really quick, it's got that like kind of coral looking background, correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so we don't have a lot of time to do this because we do have a big group of you that have sort of different, you're coming from different backgrounds, different experience. But first of all, if we could just start, I'd like to know kind of where we are with our audience today. So in the chat, if you could put where you think you are regarding your understanding of instructing students with significant cognitive disabilities. If you're 0, then let me know like you are brand new to this. If you're a 5, like you're just here to make sure that you're on the same page as the USBE, go ahead and put a 5, like you've done this, you're familiar. Ooh, Patsy, 6 to 7-ish. Woohoo! So, or if you're somewhere in between, great. Thank you, you guys. I'm seeing some 5s, some 2s, 0s, and so 3s. Yeah, as usual, we typically in a training like this have people that are kind of coming from different experience and knowledge. So for those of you that have a lot of experience and knowledge, be patient with us if it feels, you know, pretty baseline information, and then those of you that are brand new, when we get done with things, if you're like, whoa, that was way over my head, can we get further information? Then please let me know. And then also, if you can just type in the chat, you know, what are you kind of hoping to gain today? What are your main takeaways from what you would like to have happen today? That would be great. As you walk away, other than spending some wonderful time with me and Tracy on a fantastic Friday afternoon. Better understanding of assessment, I see. Thank you, Crystal. Instruction, big question. Knowledge base to help the LEAs that you work with understand for instruction. Okay, thank you. Assessments, instruction, convincing schools they need to be aware and know and be prepared for working with this population, how to determine. Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. So let's jump into it. And I also, there's my Padlet link again, which you can find if you're in the Padlet and you get on this PowerPoint. But I also just want to make sure that you guys understand that we are here to support you and to help in any way that we can. And please, you know, if you have a question that's burning, put it in the chat. And if we don't have an answer for it, Tracy and I will make note of it, and we will go ahead and you know, try to get it back to you. If we can't answer it right in the middle of this, we can kind of hold it for later, or if it's something we can answer quickly, that's fine. Also, you know, I'm very much like an adult learner. You do what works for you. You can keep your screens on, you can turn your screens off, you can run to the restroom if you need to. Like, I completely understand we're in different scenarios and situations. So that's kind of my perspective of where I'm coming from when I'm training. So the first thing I really want to talk about is who is a student with significant cognitive disability. So I saw some of you, wait, let me go back. Some of you actually put that in your what you kind of are hoping to learn today. So I am going to stop sharing this portion of my screen, and I am going to go to the document, who is a student with a significant cognitive disability. This is in the Padlet, but it's also, I'm going to put this in the chat. It's also on our website. And so if you haven't had a chance to look at this, please, let me find my chat again. Please take a minute to look at this before we really get into breaking it down. So let me put it, sorry, I'm all over the place. Let me put it in the chat. And then, again, there's a couple different ways you can get to it through the Padlet, or you can get it through the link that I just put up. And then I'm going to share that screen. So I'm just going to give you just a minute to kind of look at this with your team. You can, make sure you're muted and chat about it, or individually. If you can look at it on your own computer screen, that's great, but I'll also kind of scroll up. So go ahead and take a minute or so to look at this. Okay, so I know for sure this is not new to some of you. Is there anybody here? You can raise your hand or put in the chat if you're not familiar with this document at all. Oops, I can't really see the chat at the moment. Let me see. But it's looking to me like most of you are pretty familiar with this. Yes. What I would really appreciate, if possible, is if anybody's willing to kind of talk about some things that stand out that you have experienced as a challenge. Well, first, let me say this. This document was created by myself and Tracy, and then of course we had input from LEA stakeholders, as well as some USBE staff. It's really a technical assistance document. And what we have been trying to do is to encourage teams to bring this up, especially when you are in an IEP team and you've got one of those kind of bubble kids. Some of our kids are so obviously experiencing a significant cognitive disability. They're just, they're cognitively not able to speak. They can't, they're maybe using eye gaze to communicate. They're not able to distinguish same and different. I mean, you know what I mean? We're talking about kiddos, and I hate to bring up scores, but that's really adaptively and cognitively in the 40s or below. Some of them are just really obvious. And I'm not necessarily saying that this document is something that you'd bring into that IEPT meeting, but some of those kids that are kind of on our bubble and we're not sure what to do, about with to make sure that we're creating the right path for them educationally. We're encouraging teams to take this document and talk to parents and talk to the gen ed and talk to the related service providers. Like, what are we seeing here that's going to help us guide to make the right decision? So is anybody willing to unmute and just talk about anything that stood out to them, or what they're seeing as problematic with making these determinations?
Tanya, this is Patsy.
Yeah.
I share this with all of my schools. And it's interesting because I'm like, significant, you guys, we can't measure significant, but let's think about this significant. And I'm like, look at all the stuff on the document. And I still get, well, yeah, but, I'm just like, you make the final decision, but I'm looking at the kid. I don't think that child meets all of what's outlined on this. And it's interesting. It frustrates me, but it's really interesting to see the results that I get even after sharing this document, because the word significant to me is significant.
Well, I think it's interesting that when we created this document, Tracy and I decided not to say the most significant, but a lot of times now when you see guidance nationally, most is in front of significant, the most significant, the student with the most significant cognitive disabilities. And so, I agree with you, Patsy, that sometimes we're having a hard time getting that message across. And, I'll let Tracy speak to this as well, but a lot of times what she said, and I agree with, is like, are we making them more significant? Because we've decided that this is all they can do. And so we're putting them on this path that, we're making ID kids that maybe wouldn't have been ID kids.
So Tanya, I do have a clarifying question with that. So if a child the team has determined, well, I guess this is a dumb question, that yeah, they probably need I think that's what's killing them, is that they feel like that they have to modify the general ed curriculum so much so that they're saying, oh, they need essential elements. And then that might outweigh the intensive vocabulary on this document. Does that make sense?
It does, but I think that is a consideration. The modification is so extensive that, and it's not just like, okay, the modification in this one subject in this one grade level is so extensive. If the team is determining that it's going to be that way for probably the rest of their educational career, I think that's an okay decision for them to make. And just again, to make sure that we are clear on this, Tracy and I don't get to tell you who, qualifies or who is a student with a significant cognitive disability. That is up for IEP teams to determine. And even you all, if some of you are SPED directors, you don't get to go in and make that decision. It has to be an IEP team decision, taking into account all of these different variables. And, but you give guidance, right? You can give the guidance. And so I think that that's really important. But again, with some of these students that are right on that bubble, I don't think it's an easy decision. I really don't think it's an easy decision. And so as we look at these, and so Patsy mentioned a few things. Does anybody else want to jump in before I start going through just a couple of points that I want to make sure we're on the same page about?
Tanya, this is Janet Gibbs. One of the things that I have run across is schools make their own rules, and then, or they will ask the parents what they want. And then, of course, the parents want the easy way out, I guess, when it comes to assessment and things like that. But I don't think parents realize the instructional part that goes with that DLM assessment. And I know we'll talk about, and that's what's been so frustrating, is that they rely so much on the parent, they don't go any further. The
Right.
team.
Well,
Go for it, Tracy.
I think the other side of the coin too, Janet, is for parents to understand is it's in IDEA.
Mm-hmm.
You can go pull up IDEA 300.160. You can Google it and get to it. The other thing is IEP teams are required to inform parents when the decision is made that my student with a significant cognitive disability is going to participate, right, in that instructional support with alternate standards and an alternate assessment. That may/will affect that student's ability to graduate with the regular diploma. It's not the same rigor.
Yeah.
They can still graduate with the regular diploma, but it's not, it doesn't mean the same, right? What the team has decided is the student has such a significant cognitive disability that they cannot participate in the general education curriculum and show those measurable gains without requiring, basically altering those standards. Right. And so I think when you kind of start having those conversations, and it comes down to, at the end of the day, right, like, what is our end goal outcome for this student? Right. These are kids that are going to require intensive supports throughout their entire life. Right. Like, so my example is always, this isn't necessarily Johnny, right? Like, you would not give Johnny with a significant cognitive disability the $5 bill and he takes Sister Sally down to the corner to buy a gallon of milk by themselves, right? In essence, right? These are kids that like require some serious support.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to that presentation by LDAU, communicating to parents. And that's the whole, all those communication issues have been going on for, I've been in special ed a long time, 30 or 40 years, and it's not getting better, which is kind of depressing.
Yeah. Well, and I just want to point out too, Janet, that, you're one of the comments you made when you first started speaking had to do with assessment. And this has been my experience very often is that people are they don't want their kids to take the test. It's too hard for them to take the test. So then they want to mark that box, not realizing that it changes everything in terms of instruction. And so I think we have to be better at communicating with parents. Like, I know the test is going to be challenging for your student, but what's appropriate, So, because I feel like it often goes that way. It's that way first. They're like, the test is too hard. So we need to do instruction here. And it really legitimately needs to be the other way around. Are they making gains in the, regular core standards, in, the general education curriculum? And if they're not, without needing really significant modifications and adaptation, then we need to look at, does the student, does it make more sense for them to?
Yes, you're absolutely correct. Yeah.
And I think the key is, and this is Leah language, and I love it. At the end of the day, right, the team has to make it defensible. So if at the end of the day, this file lands, right, in a due process or in a court of law, the team has determined, right, and the information in there to make that decision point is defensible. So it's not just about scores, right? All of those things. And so they better be bringing to the table, right? Like, you have to have a COG score and you have to have an adaptive score. Those are two components that have to be there, right? You can't determine significant cognitive without those. Now, what the team does with those scores, right? Now they have to defend, right? That's the defensibility piece. So what other components, right? If you think those scores are too high and the team can't defend that, but the team says, oh no, this is where we are. What else are they bringing to the table, right, to defend that decision? And that needs to be in those files, in that evaluation information, that anecdotal note, right? All of those things.
Yeah. And we just had a good discussion about this yesterday, didn't we, Tracy? With Leah. So just, I want to move on from this, but I know it's a really important piece. So just making sure that you understand that there does have to be that intellectual functioning testing or cognitive testing and adaptive behavior. And I want to make sure that you're understanding that, like, adaptive behavior, same with cognitives. We have so many people that have this idea that it needs to be a score. And it's not really about like, oh, let's check the box off that we did these assessments. It's really, what did we learn from these assessments? I mean, you are legally bound to have adaptive and cognitive assessments, but it's not about checking the box. It's about meeting as a team and looking at what data that brings you along with all your other data to make that decision. I mean, you have to have those, but you know, we had a conversation yesterday with somebody that was like, well, can it just be, you know, is it okay? Is it enough that we got, you know, adaptive behavior from this one measure? And I'm like, I don't know. It depends. Is it enough for your team to make a decision? You know, so we just need to make sure that we're getting both of those information. And some of our kids are actually super significant cognitively, and you can't get a cognitive score, but you need to document that you attempted and why you weren't able to do that. It just has to be documented somewhere. Yeah, we couldn't try this and this and this, and we were unable to get, you know, a cognitive score, but we have this cognitive data to back up why we think, you know, observational data, benchmark data, all those kind of things. So I'm just gonna move on just down to these bullet points really quickly. So we already talked about it has to be impacting them, you know, adaptively and cognitively. But it's really not just in the classroom or in one subject. It's really got to be demonstrated in home, school, community environments, you know, and that they are significant. And again, Tracy talks about this often, and I steal it from her. When you look at scores, it will give you like you know, it depends on the tool you're using, but it will say, oh, average, low, significant, you know, maybe different language, but they need to be falling in the significant, you know, to really help guide us in terms of using those tools. And then really I encourage, and Tracy does as well, that we're not just looking like, oh, you know, if we're looking at rating scales, just, you know, in the special education classroom. This right here says it has to be demonstrated across their environment. So we want to get parent input on this. We want to get, if they are spending time in the gen ed setting, their input on this, not just one tool, one measurement of how they're doing adaptively in one setting, if that makes sense. And then
and Tanya, that's so really quickly. So that's great. So what she's talking about is for each like that assessment that your student's participating in, right? Or that evaluation, whether it's a whisk or a unit, or you're pulling a cog out of a Woodcock Johnson, right? Those assessments are normative, right? So
Right.
They have a normative scale. So you don't get a cutoff number, right? We don't say you have to be below a 70, below a 60. Now, I did hear someone said, you know, schools have criteria. Yes, you do see that, right? Schools will set a criteria, but really what it is you take that score that student got on that assessment, and they will place it in their normative scale where that student falls, right? And you have, as Leah puts it, a confidence interval, right? Each assessment will say, okay, if you were to administer this same assessment to this student on any given day, if let's say they produced a 65, they would likely produce, you know, anywhere from a 60 to a 70, right, on that given day. And so that they will place that in the scale and tell you, is that normal, below normal, significantly below, right, at risk. That is the information that the team should really be using to drive. Is it significant? Those conversations, if that helps.
Thank you, Tracy. Okay, and so just these bullet points again, really quickly, you know, I encourage people, like, is that student requiring, you know, intensive, repeated, modified, and direct individualized instruction that requires substantial supports to learn, maintain, and generalize in the grade and age appropriate curriculum and transfer those skills across multiple settings. And then also, you know, it gets even, the meaningful participation is definitely language we're hearing all the time. So are they able to have meaningful participation and make progress in that, in this academic core standards and curriculum? at their grade level without all those things that we're talking about. So, and then the other thing I just want to point out, that last bullet, the student's disability increases the need for dependence on others for many, if not all, daily living needs, and the student is expected to require extensive ongoing support through adulthood. So I just think this is a conversation we need to be having, not just like the test is too hard. I know the test is hard. I know the standards are hard, and absolutely there's a reason we have alternate assessment and alternate standards, but are we jumping the gun sometimes on these kids and just heading them down a path that doesn't make sense? So I'm going to move on from that. As I said, we will have time for questions at the end, but I want to make sure that I can get you some more information, because I could talk for hours and hours on this stuff, and I know Tracy could as well. So, okay, can you guys see my PowerPoint again, Tracy? Yes, okay, great. All right. Okay, so
Nope, we're still seeing your document. Sorry, my bad.
okay, all right. So I'm gonna stop share.
I think just switch your, oh.
I'm gonna start again and get to it. Okay.
Hi, this is Sean Frazier from Utah Military Academy. And I am so sorry that I'm late. But I'm here now. And Tanya, it looks, so you're the one giving the training?
Yes, I am, and Tracy.
Okay, so can I just, after the training is over with, then can I get with you to figure out what I've missed in the first 30 minutes?
You bet.
Awesome. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and mute my mic. So.
Okay, thank you. Can you see my PowerPoint now, Tracy? Yes, okay, thank you. Okay, so again, I think the majority, well, there were some zeros, so maybe some of you aren't familiar with the essential elements. So I'm gonna just take a few moments to kind of break down what the essential elements are, and give you some resources to that can help you instruct on the essential elements. So again, the dynamic learning maps, DLM, which we contract with them for our vendor for assessment, but we also have adopted their essential elements for our alternate standards for mathematics, science, and English language arts. We're very excited that we were able to get to adopt science. I don't know, maybe some of you aren't. We'll talk a little bit more about science in a minute, but it's, for me and the teachers I've worked with, for the most part, it's nice to have our alternate standards all sort of kind of, you know, housed in the same place and coming from the same direction. And it also greatly helps with assessment. So just for those of you that aren't aware, what we do with our alternate standards is to make sure that we give kids with significant cognitive disabilities access to our core standards by reducing them in depth, breadth, and complexity, so that they are able to access those standards, and they're directly aligned to the standards that their peers are engaging in. So there's a quick little example here of what a grade level standard might look like versus the essential element. So you can see that it really is reduced there. And we'll talk even more in just a minute about how it reduces down even further. Because if you're looking at that particular standard, you might think, oh, even that essential element is for a first grader is too challenging is too challenging for a student that we're talking about. So the essential elements focus on student learning. They can create comparable expectations for students of this population that we're talking about. They use performance terms to describe what they need to know and be able to do. And they make sure that our elements are measurable and observable. And I have some links to those. I will, in a minute, we'll go and actually look at them, and I'll put the links in your chat, as well as I did send links to most of your, if not all of your emails today. So just to give you a quick little rundown of what these skills, knowledge and skills are, this is what the maps look like. It's probably bigger now because they've added science. I think this particular map was before they added science. So this is like all these sort of knowledge and skills that we want our kids to be able to have. So try and figure out how to make that more understandable and how you get down to the nitty gritty of it. And they've done that. So I'm not going to go much into this and the research that went behind it, but it's DLM and the essential elements are always going under review and refinement by experts. And the map is just kind of the roadmap. And then we've got sort of different journeys for each student on that map. So this is, I think, a good visual. I really like visuals. So this helped me when I was learning it. So that map that I just showed you is like the big picture. And then it's broken down into claims, which I'll explain in a minute, won't spend too much time, and then conceptual areas, and then the actual essential elements that break down further into learning links and mini maps, which is so fun. I can't wait to tell you about that. So the claims are really big statements about what the students are intended to learn in whether it's mathematics or ELA or science. So this is an example of mathematics. This is not broken down by grade level yet. It's not until they get into the essential elements that they really break it down. But so a major claim is that we really want to make sure that any student in any grade are working on these claims. So increasing complex understanding of number sense, demonstrating increasingly complex spatial reasoning and understanding of geometric principles. You know, it goes down to measurement data, analytic procedures, and then use of algebra and functions. So every kid in any grade level, they're going to be experiencing some instruction on those. And here's another example of an ELA. And then it breaks down further into conceptual areas. So now they're really identifying large areas within those claims of related skills. So we looked at that math one, and they're breaking it down even further. So again, this is not by grade level, but every student that is accessing the essential elements are going to be working in these areas through their essential elements. So it breaks it down a little bit further. And I'll show you some ways that knowing these conceptual areas can really help you with your planning, your instructional planning in just a bit. And then after that, this is when they get into grade level, and this is when they get into the essential elements, the actual standard. And again, I will take you and show you some more components of this when we get into the DLM website. But so here we've got a 1.3, again, the grade level standard, and then the essential element that's broken down, which I already kind of shared with you before. So, and then here's another example of ELA. I don't want to get too into the weeds yet, because I am going to go deeper here in just a minute. So, and again, for those of you that are familiar, this is really where the instruction, I think, where there's a big help with instruction that comes in, even though the linkage levels are really for the assessment piece, it helps us with instruction as well. So we kind of know where our students are and where they can go and help us set goals and objectives for our students on standards. So this is another example of a grade level standard, which for sixth grade, even for sixth grade, seems really overwhelming to me as I read it, because math is not my strong suit. But then I look at the essential element. Again, we've got a sixth grader, and the standard that is now reduced is summarized data distributions shown in graphs or tables. And I can tell you that a lot of people that work with a sixth grader would say that still is kind of beyond where my student skill and knowledge level is even within reach. So the linkage levels are really wonderful because they do show ways that you can get that kid out there on that playing field of that standard, and be able to address the standard, teach to the standard, and they are getting that access to that standard. So linkage levels are broken down into what's called initial precursor, distal precursor, proximal precursor, target, and successor. And so that target is going to be really what's the closest to what the actual essential element or alternate standard is. The successor is going to be just a step beyond that. And I will say, and you can get a lot of this information through their assessment, but also just as people use these linkage levels for instruction, there's not a number, but if most of your students that have been determined a student with significant cognitive disability and receiving instruction through alternate standards, if you're looking at these standards and you're like, yeah, they're at target or successor for most of the standards, you might want to, as a team, be reconsidering, is this actually a student that needs to be on alternate standards and alternate assessment? Again, I mean, and Tracy's said this many times, they're not going to be, knocking it out of the park on their standards and, how they're progressing and how they're doing with assessment. But are we saying, oh my gosh, they're actually more target successor kids, they should have more access with their gen ed peers on what their gen ed peers are learning, with the core standard. So I think that's one thing that I like to just make sure that people kind of are looking at that as they're trying to make that decision. Again, we have that document that Tracy and I talked about, but if you guys are also looking at a bubble pit kid, look at some of these things and say, oh yeah, like they're really pretty much target or successor. So that can help inform your decision as well about whether you want to put that student sort of down that path. But I think really just what helps a lot of people that get overwhelmed if they're not familiar with the essential elements, when they see the linkage levels, they're like, oh yeah, my student is definitely in the range of where we are working on ordering objects or classifying objects. I can say that I can teach this grade level this standard on their grade level through the essential elements and feel, like you're doing your due diligence to make sure that you are giving them access to the standards through the essential elements. So, and I'm going to show you how to find those in just a minute. Okay. So there's also this great thing called Minimaps. And after I go through these Minimaps, I'll show you, like I was saying, how to find these. So Minimaps break it down even further. So if you're thinking back to that standard that we just looked at, it started with a grade level standard, it went to the essential element, it broke it down into those linkage levels. And now we have these maps that help with instruction and preparing for assessment. So if you remember that initial precursor, which I said was just kind of getting them on the field, was classify and order objects. This mini map actually shows you what they need to be able to do before they can classify or order objects. And so this can really help with, writing IEP goals or just preparing instruction for being able to get to that next level of the next linkage level. So again, same with after classifying and order objects was recognized that distribution of data can be described by overall shape of graphic, recognize the structure of a line plot or a dot plot, but you can see that there's something in between those that can kind of help you get to those, that next linkage level. and then we have the example of, again, these, they're untested, so these would never be tested and Tracy will talk more about assessment, but these wouldn't be tested, but that also really helps us with instruction on knowing how to get to the next level of skill or knowledge for the student and what we need to work on to kind of jump to that. So I am going to stop sharing my screen for just a minute. Are you all with me so far? Questions?
I have no questions.
Okay. I want to show you. Let's see. I think I have to do. I want to show you how to find those. Here we go. Okay, I think I need to. I don't think you can see that. You can't see the dynamic learning maps page, can you? I don't think you can. Hold on. Thanks for being patient. Okay, here we go. So again, I sent this link to you. It's also in the Padlet. I can tell that I'm going to turn my video off because it's just one of those days where it's lagging. So let me stop my video. Okay, so dynamic learning maps. I sent you the link through your email. Let me just put it in the chat really quickly so you can possibly, if you need it. So sorry, I don't know how to do it without stopping my share. Chat. Okay. And I know Tracy will spend some time with you in this site as well. So it's good to just have it open and ready. Okay. So there's different ways to get to those linkage levels and learning maps. I'm going to show you, go away. I'm going to show you the way that I have seen people most likely using it, but there's other ways as well to get to that. So I pulled up DLM, and then just so you know, there are, you can go to states. So each state does things a little bit differently regarding what resources they might have on here, what they're doing for assessment. And so currently, Utah is a year-end model regarding assessment. Tracy will give you more information about that, but there are some states that are instructionally embedded. So that means that throughout the year, they are measuring, how the student is progressing. But so going to Utah kind of gets you in the right space in terms of making sure that you're looking at the right areas of information that we have. And so I'm just going to go to Instructional Resources for year end. So they have, if you can see my up above the different buttons, there's ELA, there's mathematics, and there's science. So let's look at ELA. So ELA has the complete list of essential elements, which this is a good to know. There's other ways to also look at it, at what are the complete list in a more broken down quick list versus looking at this big document. And I'll share that with you in a minute. And then there's the currently tested. There's the English Language Arts blueprint for the year-end model. And Tracy will go into that a little bit more as well. But I want to just show you. So if you go to currently tested, and then you can pick your grade level. So let's just go ahead and pick a 7th grade, just randomly. And then you can go ahead and click on that. So let's just do determine 2 or more central ideas in a text. And they have changed, I forgot, I need to add this to my presentation. They have changed the layout of how they're doing the linkage levels, but it's still the same idea. So here you can see The essential element, you can see the grade level standard. I like that they've kind of switched it around now so that you're going directly to what we're looking at. And then they have broken it down into the initial precursor all the way through the successor. So again, this has directly to do with assessment, but believe me, this can really help inform you when you are doing instruction. And then if you keep scrolling down, they talk about how the initial precursor and distal precursor are related to the target. So that gives you a little bit even more information. And then they have, and I'm not going to talk about testlets or any of that kind of stuff. Tracy will talk about that. But they have what I showed you before, which is the mini map. So the initial precursor was that they can match a real object with a picture or other symbolic representation of the object. Then they've got these two items that would not be tested, but directly, are steps to kind of improving the skills so that you can now get that kiddo to the distal precursor. Can identify a concrete detail in early informational texts. So that is how you can find these mini maps that can really, really help with teaching. And then we've also got this document here now called Using Mini Maps to Plan Instruction. So that can go even deeper into really helping a teacher or even helping a teacher sit down with a para or, as you're lesson planning, what do we need to do? I'm talking to my gen ed, where are they in this? What can we do to kind of, make sure that we're using the map for instruction? So let me go back and I'm going to show you an example of that with math. Okay, so let's see. So now I'm going to go to math. And math has the same thing. So math has the tested essential elements. So let me clarify. If it is not a tested essential element, they will not have mini maps and linkage levels. So that is something to consider. So like all of the grade 1, 2, K through 2, they're not going to have those. Although I do have good news about that I'll share with you in a moment. So again, same thing here with math. So recognize that shapes can be partitioned into equal areas, and then they've broken those down from initial precursor up to successor. And then they can give you a little bit more information about the relationship between those and the target, of course, using mini maps to plan instruction. And then that mini map. Always have untested items or those sort of jumps from, how you get to one linkage level to the next. Like this one doesn't look like it does, but very often they do. Okay, any questions so far? I'm going to come back and share other resources regarding instruction in these areas from DLM, but at this point, any questions on the mini maps and the linkage levels? Okay, so let me go back to my PowerPoint. You guys can't see it, can you? I'm gonna have to stop sharing again. Sorry. Okay, stop share. Okay, back to my PowerPoint. All right, let's go. Okay. I'm on my laptop today. My other screen is not working, so I'm kind of having to be creative. Okay, can you see it now? Kathy, I can see you. Can give me a thumbs up if you can see my PowerPoint. Anybody, just say yes or no.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay,
Yes, we're good.
so science, I just want to give you a quick update, sorry, on science, because it's new. We are now using science. And so through the essential elements, which is very exciting. So as I mentioned before, science will be also assessed through essential elements for some of you. I know, Janet, you've been around for a while. Some of us have been around for a while. We used to do the Utah alternate assessment for all subjects, and then we started going with DLM for assessment for mathematics and ELA. But we kind of held out on science for a while, and it's been a little bit messy. So we are now using all of the alternate standards for science, ELA, and mathematics through DLM. They do align with our core science and engineering education standards. But I do want to make it clear to you guys that that it's a very minimal what DLM has in science, and they are currently expanding those essential elements. So right now they're grade banded, and they only have 3 linkage levels, I believe: target, initial, and distal. So they're expanding the number of essential elements, and then they're gonna not grade band anymore, and then they're also going to have additional linkage levels. So we do, you know, I think if you went and looked at ELA and mathematics standards, you would quickly see, compared to science, that we don't have nearly as many for science, but they are working on that. So that's pretty exciting. And we do have a science resources Padlet if you want a little bit more information on instructing through the science, you know, just because it's new to everybody. Tracy and I put that Padlet together. And we just one quick side note, there are some science standards, that core standards that are specific to Utah that were not really covered in those DLM standards. And so we have pulled together a team to write alternate standards that right now we're in the middle, there's like 7 of them. So right now we're in the middle of refining those and getting them out to the public. So but I just think it's really exciting that we have all of those available now along the same format. This is what science looks like right now. So we've got the domain, the core idea. Of course, we have the grade level standard. As I was mentioning, we've got of course, the essential element, and then we've got the target, precursor, an initial. Yeah, so it's a little bit different than what we just went through. One thing that I really like about it, though, is that they have connections to other essential elements. So you can see here, this science standard connects to these ELA standards, and they can show you where they connect. And I think for instruction, that's super helpful to be able to see, oh my gosh, I can do a science lesson that is actually addressing addressing a couple other ELA standards. So DLM is fantastic. They have really set things up and continue to improve and come up with things to really help us make those connections for instruction. Okay, so just a couple things to remember. Students must be instructed on their grade level standards. And again, back in the day, you know, I'm thinking 10 years ago or 12, 13 years ago, when the essential elements first came out, people were freaking out. Teachers were freaking out because I can't instruct my student who's developmentally on a first grade level, but it's a 7th grader on 7th grade standards. But you can see that essential elements break it down, linkage levels, Minimaps break it down so that you can. Students should have exposure to all the standards. There's by no means an expectation that we are going to have them just like our typical kids. They're not going to, be at success on all these standards and achieve to the highest level on all these standards. So they need to be exposed to all. If some of the standards are more more in tune, in line with their IEP goals, then you would definitely be wanting to make sure that those are standards that you're maybe spending a little bit more time on. And then also, and really working towards making good progress through those standards. And then also IEPs should be aligned with alternate achievement standards. All right. Okay, so I kind of showed you where you find the standards already. We talked about linkage levels. I'm going to take you and show you the science, math, and ELA resources here in just a minute. But I'm wondering that last bullet, where do you teach the essential elements? And we're getting close to our break, and I want to just take a little bit of time to just get what are your thoughts on this? Because Tracy and I would love to know the answer. Where do you teach the EEs? Does it matter? Anybody?
Well, if I can step in for just a second. Something I really appreciate about this essential element, and obviously this is what it's designed to do, but it gives us an awful lot of flexibility in regards to the individual student's needs. Like we need to have, like it said on the first page you pointed out, or you were showing us when I got here, was a comprehensive understanding of the student's needs. So these claims and how they're directly linked to the major parts of the standards give us the flexibility that we'll need to help each individual student. The first student I ended up working with who later qualified for DLM was completely nonverbal. I have one this year who is verbal, but cognitively struggles a lot. So it's, we're trying to fill two different pegs, but this I feel like allows us to do that.
Great, thank you, Scott. Other thoughts? Where are your students? What location are they being taught their essential elements in? What's working, what's not working?
So at Utah Military Academy, I'm fortunate enough to have, my own. I have my classroom, and then my 4 students that I have that are EE. I have them in their own environment. I do like that because I can teach them at their level, and I can do like a PowerPoint presentation or something like that at their level. And my students like it because they don't feel, well, for lack of a better term, they don't feel stupid if they were in a regular, in a gen ed setting. And so that works well. Now, granted, this is a chartered school. It's a military academy, so it's a little bit different than your mainstream, but it does seem to work. And I make sure that the kids are still integrated into other aspects of of school, but just for that EE, I have the benefit of just having them in that one classroom. And I might add that in my classroom, I make sure I was able to get a classroom that had a lot of natural light in it. So they're not just stuck in a closet kind of a thing.
Okay, thank you. Any other thoughts? So I think this is one thing that comes up a lot for me. I know Tracy's been in these conversations as well. There's a lot of people that kind of desire to make sure that they're doing least restrictive, obviously, and inclusive practices, but struggling to figure out how to do that, and then also teach essential elements. And I think what we're seeing is a lot more common than that, as what we just heard is more common, is that they're finding it easier to pull the kids to do that. I do recommend, even if that's the situation, that as much as possible to sort of map with your gen ed teachers when they're teaching the standards, what standards and when, so that if they do end up, having some overlap in those gen ed classes, their peers are sort of learning those standards, sort of at their level at the same time as these students are learning their, at their level. That can be really helpful, I think, in terms of inclusionary practices. Every once in a while, I see a school that they have figured out that they can teach the EEs in the direct classroom with the gen ed peers and gen ed teacher. And, we see some of this with older students in co-teaching and those kind of things. But even when they have a really good co-teaching model for these students that are more significant, they're quite challenged on how to make sure that they're considering inclusion, and then also making sure that students get the instruction that's appropriate. So there's not an answer to that. So,
so last year or 2 years anyway, so we did try doing inclusion, and my situation that I had, we were at this was a 7th grade science class, but then we did have one student that was on a 1st grade level, and we did find that it was difficult to teach that. We still did try to match, what they were learning in the 7th grade. But as you had stated earlier, it was very difficult to take 7th grade curriculum and bring it down to a 1st grade level. And so that's one of the reasons why the school decided to, instead of having, with inclusion with these cadets, we may need to go ahead and put them in their own classroom.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. I know. I just honestly think it's a big challenge that we're having regarding instructing, these students in all of this. So I appreciate you sharing your experience.
There might be another way too. I put one of my suggestions, but depending on the teacher and everything, a science teacher, a math teacher, biology teacher, whatever, might want to come into the severe classroom or another setting or in the library or something, so that they and the teacher, special ed teacher, could share the essential element. And I bet you anything a teacher would love, general ed teacher would love to do that every so often. So there's ways to do it. It's just cooperation between gen ed and special ed.
Yeah, I agree.
Think outside the box. I
think so too. And I think sometimes for charter schools, it's a little easier for y'all to do that, especially if you're a little bit smaller. I do see some of those relationships happening for sure. So yes, thank you for sure. And I'll be honest with you, when gen ed teachers learn about the essential elements, they love them, because not that they want to put their kids, their students necessarily on that path, but it helps them understand some differentiation regarding that gen ed standard. Like they're like, oh yeah, this really breaks it down for me. If I can kind of take this into consideration when I am teaching my student that's struggling, it can really help them. So
that's a great suggestion, because good way to introduce them to differentiated instruction and specially designed instruction without just throwing them into it without any examples or whatever. That's a really good suggestion.
Yeah. Okay, so we are running out of time, and I want to make sure for time. So I'm going to go over just a little bit, but not much, and then I'll get you your break. So I want to make sure you do know about some of these resources. So again, in the essential elements under English language arts, and Tracy might talk a little bit more about this because it actually has to do as well with the actual assessment. There are these familiar texts. And so what they have done is there are, let me go to Tar Heel Readers. I'll just give you an example. So if you are wanting to, you know, you want to make sure that you're teaching students sort of the same, let me see, look here, I'm trying to go to the grade level. Books, experiences as their peers, the Tar Heel readers have broken down I'm just trying to find, Grace, do you know where I find the actual grade level?
Yeah, so go back.
Yeah. Because, and also then if they're familiar with these books, they are also, they are set up better for assessment because they've had exposure to these books, which are a part of the, oh, here we go. I got it. Thank you. Okay, so let's just go to like a grade 8. So these are part of their assessment. So you can see like the Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Their, you know, classmates might be learning about Tom Sawyer, and then they have these books that have been written for regarding that kind of stuff, like really broken down, obviously. But, and then people can write, you can make your own books, you can find books that are approved by DLM that you will know for sure that they are directly related to, you know, books that the kids will probably be exposed to when they're doing their assessment. I'll let you go into that a little bit more, Trace, but later. But so there's that wonderful resource. Let me go back to, and then there's also, I'll let her go into Testlets. Writing, they have some really good, this is not what I wanted. Tracy can go into that, writing Testlets. I don't want to go into instructional stuff. Let me look at math. A really good thing to know about math is that the glossary is very important when you are instructing. So one of the big struggles that our students have when they do take the assessments is that we're using different words with them in instruction than how they are assessed. And so I think when you're kind of breaking down how to instruct, you want to make sure you're using the right language. It doesn't give you like necessarily what standard it goes to. But if you are, you know, instructing and you see the word analyze, come to the glossary and see if that is something that is in the glossary. And if it is, you want to make sure that you are using the same language and not making up language for our students to make it more friendly for them. You want them to really be familiar with it. Science, they've got these instructional activities, which are fantastic. And I think we'll get more of these as time goes on. So they kind of have like these little lesson plans in here that are directly related to the standard, which is wonderful and very helpful. And then I'm gonna just quickly show you 2 more things. Let me go to professional development. And DLM's getting better at making it a little bit more user-friendly to get through. It used to take me a while, and you can still even see sometimes I'm a little bit confused. But they have professional development listed by, organized by the modules or alphabetical. There's different ways they actually have them organized, but there's modules. So this first one, ELA Claim 1, students will comprehend text in increasingly complex ways. They have all these modules that are instructional for us. So if, for instance, if you're really struggling with, I don't really understand this. I don't know how to teach this. You know, I'm a seventh grade or I'm a first grade teacher, or I have a student that's on a first grade level, but, you know, is really having to access a seventh grade standard. I don't really understand that. Then that can really help you break it down. And then they also have these great modules, unpacking the essential elements, different resources, communication support. I mean, there's so many good things at the site that people don't realize are there. So there's just a lot of different, I mean, I could spend days and days just playing around with it with you, but the best thing is like, just as you get students, as you're like trying to get better and more equipped to serve these students, going around and playing on those instructional resources and the professional development can really help you, you know, get more equipped to work with this population.
Will you go back
Yeah.
to the modules? Oh, go back to the modules really quick. And I'm okay if you take some of my time. It's fine.
Okay.
Because the instructional stuff is so important. But what's really cool about the modules that Tanya was in. So for example, right, my background is significant cognitive. That is my license. And those were the kiddos that I instructed. So scroll down to math, just pull up one of the math ones. So I don't know about you guys, but like, I am not like super strong in how do I teach these core concepts? So like, how would I teach composing and decomposing and comparing numbers to my kids? So just click on one of those. That's where these modules are really awesome, is what they help you do. And they're really short, but you would come in and there's like these little videos and it will actually walk you through what it looks like, right, to teach and instruct that concept to those kids. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so they're amazing. So if you get into a standard and like, for example, you're like area or, you know, the perimeter and things like that, all those things that you have to teach, that's where those are really awesome. And they're quick, short little videos. They're like 16 minutes. You do like a pre-test at the beginning, which can be scary. So it kind of tests your content knowledge. And then you watch the video and there's like a little pre-test afterwards, or at least that's the way it used to be. But anyway, that is a fantastic resource. And then definitely that math glossary that Tanya showed you. And as she said, so the biggest hindrance that your kiddos will have when it comes to math is the vocabulary. So when you pull up that essential element and it uses the word attribute or it uses the word analyze, right? Like that is the vocabulary that students will see in Testlets, right? And you can't define that at that given point. Those are words that you can't go into explaining. So using that glossary will really help with that. And the cool part, I like to use attribute as my example, but when you look at attribute, if you're thinking, what the heck does this look like, right? How do I teach the word attribute? It will give you that definition. And so it will give you ideas and break down that vocabulary word to really help you teach that instructionally. So I think those two are very fantastic resources.
Awesome. Thank you, Tracy. So I'm just gonna, there's several more slides on here and I'm not gonna go through them because I wanna just let you know that there's actually a process for walking through it on your own in my Padlet on how to curriculum map, how to lesson plan. And so if you are like, okay, I get it. I understand what essential elements are now. I want to make sure that I map out when I'm going to teach it, and then some ways to lesson plan for that. There's a self-guided way to do that on my Padlet. But I do want to, and I'm going to just skip through these really quickly because I do kind of explain it in here, but this is all on my Padlet. And please reach out to me if you want further information on how to do this. But I do want to tell you one thing that I'm really excited about. Oh, first, okay, so people ask me all the time about curriculum, and I get it. I mean, I'm kind of old school myself. So people want like a box curriculum. We've kind of done that in special ed for so long, and I think we're getting away from that more and more. But there are some, what I would say, traditional box curriculums, you know, whether they're on the internet or, you know, whether they're virtual or like actual like books. And here's some examples of those. Attainment is the one that I hear people using the most. there is not one single curriculum that's out there that is that aligns directly with every essential element. There just isn't. And so what I tell people is like, okay, attainment, because attainment has functional, math, ELA, science, they have really good curriculum, but I just say you need to look at that, you know, cross compare it to the essential elements and figure out where the gaps are so that you make sure that you aren't missing those. And then the other thing that I want to just tell you is that we do have lesson plans that are in development. So we're almost done with all our math lesson plans. And we will have, and they'll be available to anybody that wants them. Next year, we'll be focusing on ELA, and then the following year, we'll be focusing on science. So we've hired some teachers that work with this population who are just have experience and knowledge, and we've given them a template for writing lesson plans and a rubric for us kind of making sure that they're hitting what we want them to hit. And so it's not the end all be all, because one lesson plan does not mean that you have, you know, instructed to full capacity for everything for the student, you know, with a significant cognitive disability on the standard, but it's a starting place. And so I'm really excited about that, because probably that is the biggest question I get in my from LEAs is what curriculum is out there? What curriculum is out there? How do I instruct on this? You know, so just as I wrap up, please, and I'll stay with Tracy and answer questions and stuff as well after, but please know that if you want further information on really how to lesson plan and curriculum map that you can't kind of make out through the Padlet, I'm more than happy to do another hour with you or something if that works for your group. Okay, we won't go to standards-based IEPs. I've got my contact information as well as those DLM links there. And let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and take 10 minutes. Is that okay, Trace, to come back at 2:05?
Yep, absolutely. And here in the meantime, while we're doing that, I'm going to throw a Jamboard link into the chat. So as you're coming back and taking your break, pop into that Jamboard and go ahead and fill out a sticky note if you can on that first one. And we'll see you in 10 minutes.
Thank you, everybody. Tracy, do you want to see if you can share your screen?
It says disabled. So
let me see. Okay, try it now. Okay, cool.
awesome. Thanks.
All right. That conversation about who was a student with significant cognitive disabilities went a little bit longer than I thought. So I kind of ran out of time, but it's probably the most important part of the training in a lot of ways. So.
Yeah, it is.
So it's looking like Scott said the Jamboard.
Hold on, I'm working on that. I just realized that. Okay, so I got to change that. Anyone with the link, viewer, editor, done. Now try it. I think it should work now. I just thought of that. Where is other chat? I know we have all these cool toys and gadgets and things, and then
it is working for me.
Got to remember to do all the sharing permissions.
I know. Yeah, Jamboard's working now.
Cool. Thanks for keeping me on track. Okay. So I see a couple people filling into the Jamboard. I am going to give 2 more minutes. I'm starting my timer right now. I would love to see more people post on the Jamboard. So I know we have more than 3 people here in this training. So anything you can think of that you may know, if you're in a room with someone, elbow partner and go in on one together, maybe utilize the resources you have around you.
Tracy, it's not giving me access to it.
Well, that is not cool. I don't know what else to do, because it should be anybody with a link. Anyone on the internet?
Just maybe try and refresh it, because she fixed it. Try and refresh her page.
Yeah, I'll put the link in there again, see if that works. Refresh my page too, I don't know. Or if you can't access the Jamboard, throw it into the chat. How about that, Crystal?
Refreshing it worked.
Okay, awesome, good. All right, 45 seconds. If you don't know, just put a question mark in there too. I know that works. Very little, I love it.
I'm trying to jam, but I can't do it.
Okay, we'll throw something in the chat, Sean, then if you want, that works. Students with significant intellectual disability.
And if you haven't used Jamboard, on the left side of your screen, I think it's like the 4th symbol down, there's like a little sticky note looking thing. You can click on that, and if it's giving you access, you should be able to write it.
Change your color. Awesome, thanks, Tanya. Okay, so that's our timer. So I love it. We've got some things going on there, not a ton, but it's for students with significant cognitive disabilities. Training is needed. Awesome. That's why we're here today. I love it. Okay, cool. So we've got some basic understanding happening there. So that's really awesome. Feel free to keep adding to that if you want. Otherwise, we are going to go ahead and jump in and get going, because we don't have a lot of time. What are you guys seeing? I'm sharing this screen. Are you seeing presentation mode? Or
I see your notes.
Yeah, dang it.
I know.
Okay, well, we're gonna do this. It's fine. Can you guys see this clearly enough?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, perfect. All right, so today's learning intentions. Know what students participate in alternate assessments. Check, we did that early on. Understand DLM administration expectations. Learn where to find resources. You found some of those already. And learn how to navigate Educator Portal. So hopefully we will be able to at least jump in and I can demo a few things for you. We are going to know we have learned these things by being able to list the evaluation assessments required for students to participate in alternate assessments. You're going to calendar or write down our DLM window, be able to pull up test blueprints, mini maps, look at those things, and hopefully be able to open up our first contact survey in P&P. That may be something that we check off after today. But what is the DLM assessment? So it is our alternate assessment used in accountability in place of RISE, Utah Aspire Plus, or ACT, right, for students with significant cognitive disabilities. So the next 2 bullet points here are really important. So the students that we assess on DLM are students in grades 3 through 11 for ELA and math. Science, we start assessing students in science in grade 4. So science is grade 4 through 11. So if you have elementary kiddos, if you have 3rd and 4th graders, your 3rd graders will only be rostered to you for ELA and math, and your 4th graders and above will be rostered for all subjects. It is based on our alternate achievement standards, the essential elements that Tanya just went over, and it is a computer-based and adaptive assessment. So the way the assessment is adaptive is students get delivered down what are called testlets. And we will get into those testlets a little bit later, but the way the adaptive works is it adapts between those linkage levels that Tanya was talking about earlier. So higher, same, lower, between testlets. So each testlet adapts, where our other assessments, some of them are item adaptive, but it is adaptive. Okay, expectations. So this is one of our things that we have to know. So write down on a sticky note, screenshot, do whatever it is you need to do. Our testing window for DLM, it opens on March 14th this year. And you have until June 10th, or whenever your students get out of school, or whenever your district or charter school tells you need to be done, to test those kiddos. For our other regular assessments, your schools have set specific windows for RISE, possibly Utah Aspire Plus. I do not advise that for DLM. It can take upwards to weeks to get through the testlets for kiddos. You don't have to start March 14th, but I would highly recommend that when you come back from spring break, you start testing these kiddos, especially if you have kiddos that have some chronic absences. We definitely want to get them tested. This PowerPoint is also on the Padlet, so you will be able to pull this up and link to all of these things. There is an expectation that all of our test administrators across the state, no matter what assessment they are administering, read through test administration manuals. And so for DLM, you're going to want them to read through pages 30 through 37 and 80 through 86 in that test administration manual sometime before you sit down and administer the assessment. There is a fantastic guide. It is called the Educator Portal User Guide. I will show you where you can find that. But pages 47 through 53 will walk you through that spring window assessment information. But it is a guide that gives you screenshots and step-by-step instructions on how to complete anything and everything you need in Educator Portal. So I kind of think of that as like our holy Bible to DLM, if you will. We do offer what's called an instructionally embedded test window, so a mid-year testing window that has opened, and it is open through February 23rd. So you can find information on that on those pages in the TAM and Educator Portal user guide. If you are in a school that does benchmarks or interim testing for your regular ed students, utilizing this instructionally embedded window fulfills that obligation to have something for those students who teams determine participate in alternate assessments. So you can go in and create what's called an instructional planner, and you actually get to pick out some essential elements, and you can actually pick out linkage levels and go through and test students, do some instruction, test again. It is a fabulous resource if you want. Okay. There is required DLM training outside of what we do today that all test administrators have to participate in every single year. They have two different modules. They have one that is a returning teacher module and one that is a new teacher module. So if you have previously, and this would be last year, if you've had a gap year, so let's say you had a DLM account and did testing in 2019, but we didn't test in 2020, and you may have not tested last year, you will be re-delivered a new teacher module. You're kind of considered a new teacher at that point. Anyway, every teacher has to participate in that training.
Tracy, we have a question in the chat. Does the interim testing need as much time? It sounds like we can pick and choose, question mark.
Yep, you can. So you get to kind of choose your own adventure there. You can do as many essential elements as you want, not as many. It definitely, it's up to you. You could test 3 essential elements. And we'll look through some blueprints to kind of help you get a gauge as to what essential elements you can find in there. But yeah, they're optional. So if you want more information, there's actually a couple videos too that will help you if you're thinking you want to do those instructionally embedded. There are some videos that you can watch to walk you through how to set those things up. Here's the cool part about those instructionally embedded though. You do get automatic score reports that do produce where your student is in mastery in that essential element that you do test, which is kind of cool. So yeah, so if you want to know more about that, definitely reach out to me and I can shoot some resources to you. Okay, so you do have to complete that required training. There are self-directed modules that you can do that walks you through, and there's quizzes that you have to take. Here's the key to your required training. When you get through and you complete those required training modules, there will pop up at the end a place that says get your certificate. You actually have to click on the get certificate button and actually pop up that certificate that says you've completed your training. That's the official unlock button in DLM. So you cannot get into test management and administer any testlets until you've completed that training. Okay, DLM testlets. So the way they work is testlets are delivered one at a time down to kiddos. ELA, regardless of the grade that they're in, will see 9 testlets. Math, it's dependent upon grade. Students will see anywhere from 6 to 8 testlets, and science is 9 testlets as well. Each testlet has anywhere from like 3 to 9 items on a testlet, and that's where that adaptive algorithm comes into play. So the way that works is for students, you have to fill out what is called a first contact survey. They will go through that in that required training that you take. They'll talk all about those things. You'll see some example slides, and you fill out that first contact survey. It talks about things like where a student is with communication, where they are with their motor skills. Can they independently navigate a computer system? And then it also goes into things around where they are with their academic skills. And what happens is based upon the information you fill out in that first contact survey for a student, and when you submit that, that is what drives the linkage level within that first testlet that gets delivered. So a student will get delivered their first testlet on target, possibly successor if they really have high skills, all the way down to initial precursor. So when that first testlet delivers, students take it, and then what happens is that algorithm will then start running. Dependent on how your student answers within that first testlet, the algorithm then kicks out your next testlet and vice versa. Does that make sense on how that is working? I see a couple head nods. Okay, so what this means, back to that time frame. So students will see anywhere from 24 to 26 testlets, right, that they have to participate in. Now, before I came up to the state office, I did the first year's administration in the classroom with DLM. I had 19 kids. Granted, we weren't doing science, but we did ELA and math. Here's how I did it. I created a spreadsheet of all my kids. And what I did is I sat down, Johnny sat down, we did an ELA testlet, we did a math testlet, we're going to do a science testlet. Johnny's out, Sally comes in. And then I just kind of rotated through that. You have a ton of flexibility in how you administer testlets to students. Okay, you may have students that you can put 3 at a time that can independently navigate, and you're just there overseeing and helping out where needs be. You have other students that you probably know, I'm going to have to test Johnny individually by himself, right? So you need to think about how you're scheduling that. You have students that maybe you can pull them back to the back part of the room and test them with other kids in the classroom and they're doing other activities. Or you may have those kids that you know that you need to test by themselves in a room, right? Because they're squirrels. So you have a lot of flexibility that happens within how you deliver those testlets.
I've got a question. If the student is a senior, does he need to be tested?
Nope, we will not even route 12th grade students to DLM. So just grades 3 through 11. Great question. Okay, so ELA is going to be your longest testlet to probably complete. Science may fall right there behind that. So I always started with my ELA testlets. When you get into an ELA testlet, the way it works is you read your first text one time through, and then what happens is you have to read the text again, and your comprehension questions are embedded within that second reading. So if you have students that you know reading the text twice may set them off, I would start engaging in that right now in instruction. Start using those Tar Heel readers that Tanya showed you and start practicing that. We're going to read our story and then we're going to embed whatever activities it is that we're doing in then that second read through. Most Testlets come down computer delivered. However, your Testlets that come in at those lower linkage levels will be teacher delivered Testlets. And we can look at some of those tips pages. The way the teacher delivered Testlets work is you log into the computer underneath the student and it prompts you for questions and engagement activities. And then your student is interacting with manipulatives on the side and you're recording their observations into the computer. Okay. But for the majority, a lot of kids will see these computer delivered Testlets. You can read the Testlet. You can indicate and mark that you need read aloud for the kiddo. And there is also embedded text to speech that you can set for the kid in what they call a P&P. So it's their personal needs and preference profile. That's where you would go set those quote unquote accommodations, if you will. So you can control the screen for the kiddo. When I was in the classroom, I had some kids that were very independent. They navigated. I helped where need be. I had other kids that Johnny's not touching that mouse because he's going to click, click, click and move on. I controlled the mouse and he sat at the computer and we went through things. You can have students verbalize their answers. You can have students touch the screen in what answer they want to pick. If you have students using any sort of like behavioral components, penny boards or reinforcers, bring those into the testing session, right? Maybe you have kids that like they earn their first 3 pennies, right? And they do 3 questions and they get a couple minutes to interact with a reinforcement box. So bring all of those things in play. What's the other thing? Lots of things to think about. Communication devices. I went out and observed a student who was rather nonverbal. He was a student with autism and had a lot of echolalia. And it was very painful as the teacher was going about and trying to get the answers out of the kiddo. You could see the kids start escalating, the teacher was escalating, and it was not a good situation. So in that one given moment of interrupting assessment, I said, let's stop for a second and take a break. And I asked the teacher, I said, how does this kid indicate to you like right and wrong answers or whatever it is in instruction that you're teaching him? She goes, oh, well, he has an iPad and we use like a yes, no board. And I said, for the love, please go get the iPad and bring the yes board in. She goes, oh, I didn't know I could do that. She brought the iPad in, pulled up the yes, no board, and they moved through Testlets because the kid actually had his mode of communication that he usually uses instruction. So please note you can bring those components in. Okay, so just a few things about Testlets there. Okay, Dlm Home Page. So this is one, Tanya, I think had put a link in there and she was going through resources. I would bookmark this on your computers if you already have not done so. I'll throw the link in the chat or maybe Tanya can throw it in just a second. You can access everything you need DLM through this web page. You can get to Educator Portal. You can pull up all those resources. Everything you need, you access through this DLM web page. So I would definitely bookmark this. Okay, Educator Portal. So let's.
I'm taking a second. I'm putting it in now.
Yeah, you're fine. We'll get to it later. We're going to go in and play with it. So I'm not too worried about it. Okay, you have 2 portals that happen with assessment. We have what's called Educator Portal, and then you have what's called Student Portal. So Educator Portal is exactly what it is. It's for me as an educator, right? You as an educator. This is the portal that I go in and I manage all my student accounts. So this is where I'll find my students. I'll find my rosters. This is where I go in and I fill out that first contact survey information of where my kid's at in their learning. This is where I find that personal needs and preference profile in here to indicate any accessibility things that we need. This is where you will also then find what are called your test tickets. So your students log in, and you will also find what are called tips pages. So teacher information, something page. We're going to look at these. So if there's one thing that you really take away from this training, you need to know that you need to access and look at every single tips page for every single testlet that comes down for kiddos. Okay, this is the page that will give you all of the testing information that you need to prepare yourself to sit down and administer the tests. You can also access student reports. So once students become rostered to you, you as a teacher can go in and pull up student reports. Any DLM testlet that student has ever taken will be in there. You can access all of those score reports from previous years. Okay, student portal. So this is the portal, they call it Kite Suite. This is the portal that needs to be downloaded onto the computers that your students will be taking testlets on. It can be iPads, MacBooks, laptops, desktops, Chromebooks, any of those are allowable. These have to be updated. It's called the secure browser every single year. So if you had this pushed out, sometimes it's IT that pushes this out to devices, just let them know that they need to push out the new updated version. So on that Dlm Home Page, you'll see on the top bar, this Kite Suite. That's the link that you and your IT need to be able to access the secure browser link to push out to those computers. Okay, so this is where students log in and take testlets. Okay, we have some checklists here, and I think I'm going to skip through this for the sake of time because I'm going to show you that on the Padlet, but I have a checklist for you. What are the things that I need to do in my teacher account to be able to administer tests? There's a checklist for all the things that you need to do for students. And then there's like an administration test checklist. All right, I'm getting ready to sit down and administer DLM to kiddos. Here's all the stuff that I need. So I'll show you where you can access that in just a second. Okay, with that, let's go back to our Jamboard really quick. So if you can pull that up. On your second slide should be, when is the DLM spring testing window? So I'm going to set my timer. I'm going to give you 1 minute to throw those sticky notes in there. And this is also testing to see how awesome you are at listening to a speed reader. April through July, okay. If you can't access Jamboard and you want to throw it in the chat, I've got someone in there yet. You can throw it in the chat too. So in the chat, we've got a March 14th through the end of school. We've got a May through June. We have 10 seconds left. Okay, so it is March 14th through June 10th. Okay, that is your testing window. So you have from March 14th through June 10th, right, for testing. Okay. Excellent. All right. Let's get into some alternate assessment compliance stuff really quick. And then we're going to jump into our Padlet and Educator Portal. So this is really important. We have what's called the 1% participation threshold. So the federal government has determined that a state can only assess 1% of their overall student population on an alternate assessment. So with that in play, we have all kinds of fun things that we've had to start doing. So the first thing is we have to ensure as a state, and your districts have to ensure that we have the appropriate students participating in our alternate assessments. So these have to be students with significant cognitive disabilities that have an impact in their intellectual functioning and adaptive behavior. They are performing significantly below grade level expectations, and they require that really extensive, intensive, and adapted instruction. So Tanya really did a really good job walking through all of those things. We actually have very specific alternate assessment guidelines out there for teams to use. I would suggest printing these. You can access this on the Padlet, but you should print it, and you should be bringing this into IEP team meetings so that when you're having these conversations at the table with parents, you've got this checklist so that we make sure that we have appropriate students participating. The key here is when we talk about these kiddos, we're talking about all content areas. So what this means is we would not have a student with a significant cognitive disability that requires instruction in using the alternate standards and participating in our alternate assessments in one subject. So Johnny would not be doing English language arts in DLM, but taking the math RISE. Does that make sense? So really what we're saying is if my students can actually access core in one subject, right, but they can't in another, then we're not really probably talking about a student with a significant cognitive disability. So they participate in all subjects for DLM. What DLM is not, so what we can't do is say, oh, all of my students who are have a classification of autistic are going to participate in the DLM. It doesn't work that way. We can't say, well, you know, Johnny's a really low reader and he just doesn't do really good with reading. And I think he would not do very good on the RISE test. We need to give him the alternate assessment, things like that. So we have heard comments from teachers across the state over the years that we've been out and monitoring and doing those things, that when we talk about why the team determined that a student will participate in alternate assessment, those are some of the things that we have heard. So just note that that's not what qualifies a student for participating in an alternate assessment. We have two caveats to our typical rule of normally when students qualify for special education services, right, we service them in their area of need. We have two disability classifications out there that cannot participate in alternate assessments. So if you have students that have a specific learning disability or emotional disturbance, they cannot participate in the alternate assessment, and here's why. So when the IEP team determined that a student qualifies for special education under specific learning disabilities, the team ruled out that it was not primarily a result of an intellectual disability. So at that point, the team ruled out that this isn't a student with a significant cognitive disability. So therefore, they cannot participate in an alternate assessment. Same thing happens with ED. So it states that emotional disturbance means a condition that adversely affects a student's educational performance that is one, an inability to learn that cannot be explained by intellectual. So the same thing happens there, right? The team determined this is not an intellectual disability, therefore they can't be significant cognitive. So what do? If you have kiddos now possibly sitting in your classroom that have been outlined to participate in the alternate assessment, but they have an SLD or ED classification, or if you get a kid that transfers in and has this, what does the team need to do? The team needs to sit down and determine, do you really think you have a student with a significant cognitive disability on your hands? And does the data that you have in front of you present that? If the answer is yes, then the team needs to start the reevaluation process and determine, do you need to gather more data to look at a more appropriate classification for the kiddo? Or if you go, no, really at the end of the day, I think we've maybe misidentified the significant cognitive disability, then the team needs to remove the student from alternate assessment participation. So we do specifically monitor this across the state. We do look at students with these classifications and have that 1% marker. And we flag those and monitor those, and we do ask teams to make those corrections. So just so you're aware. Here are other really important IEP compliance areas that you need to be aware of. So for these students with significant cognitive disabilities that are participating in our alternate assessments, every single IEP goal, including academic, OT, PT, speech, all are required to have benchmarks or short-term objectives, and you need to ensure that they're all measurable. You are also required to, in that IEP, draft a statement for one, why the student cannot participate in the regular assessment and why the particular alternate assessment is appropriate for that student. So we do monitor this. And what we find is we've got a lot of teams that are missing that A part of the statement, what assessment the student is not participating in. So here's an example of a really robust compliance statement. Tracy cannot participate in the regular assessment RISE because she has a significant cognitive disability that requires instruction using the alternate achievement standards. Therefore, it is more appropriate for her to participate in the alternate assessment. So we do look for those things in monitoring. The assessment addendum that you fill out during the IEP also needs to indicate that the student's participating in the alternate assessment. So on that assessment addendum, you will see DLM, and you can just mark PAA, which stands for participating with alternate assessment. We do also see PAA marked in the assessment addendum under our regular ed assessments, but as long as it says PAA, that indicates participate alternate assessment, it's compliant, right? Because that's what we know they're participating in. The other thing you need to check for is there has to be a formal COG and a formal adaptive assessment or a component pulled out of an assessment in their evaluation, and it needs to be pulled forward and present in the most current evaluation for those students. So those are some compliance areas that are really important for you to be aware of. Okay, with that brings us to our next Jamboard. So you can either choose to fill it out in the Jamboard or you can choose to fill it out in the chat. That's the dog, apologies. List the 2 evaluation assessments that are required to be present in a student's file in order for them to participate in the alternate assessment. And I'm setting our timer to a minute. Cognitive and adaptive. Awesome. Cognitive adaptive. Cognitive adaptive. Awesome. Tanya had touched a little bit. Sometimes we do have students that you can't actually produce a cognitive score from. So if that is the case, it needs to be stated in that evaluation and that summary that you attempted, right? Students unable to access, you've attempted a nonverbal. So there needs to be some indication in there. Just don't leave it blank. You have to write something in there that denotes that attempt in performing that COG. Okay, awesome. The compliance error that we see most of the time missing in files is not necessarily cognitive. We see missing adaptive. Comes back to that classification component. You've got certain classifications that don't require what we call that full battery of assessments. And so it gets missed at time of evaluation. And if you don't have an adaptive component in there, you can't determine significant cognitive. So go back and do some internal file audits and make sure you're seeing those in there. Awesome job. Okay, so now with all that fun stuff, we're going to go look at the Padlet and get in and actually do some of that work. And we're going to get into Educator Portal too. Okay, so I do believe Tanya put this in the chat earlier, but here it is again. So this Padlet is a good one. I would recommend bookmarking this as well. What this Padlet does is this is going to walk you through all of our expectations. It's going to link you to all those resources that Tanya showed you and we talked about. The way this Padlet works is here are some guiding documents that you need to go through. The PowerPoint presentation that we just looked at is right here for you. I talked earlier about the alternate assessment participation guidelines. You can access that here. I would print these and have them handy and bring them into those IEP meetings. So it talks through all of those fantastic things we just looked at, as well as gives you our official definition of significant cognitive disability. The next thing you'll find here, we talked about checklists. I would definitely print this out or download it. So if you, when you get ready to start moving into assessments, here's all the things that you need to have done for yourself on your account. And I also link you to all those fantastic manuals here. So you need to gain access to Educator Portal, which most of you have. If you don't have access, you need to shoot me an email. Once you immediately log into Educator Portal, the first thing that pops up is a security agreement. You've got to check that off. You've got to complete your required training, be able to know how to get to the Dlm Home Page, and then there's your link to your test administration manual. For students, right? We've verified their eligibility to participate in Dlm. We are going to make sure that we check and see all of our appropriate students on our rosters. We're going to complete the P&P and their first contact survey. And then this links you to Educator Portal user guide and some page numbers in there that will help you complete these tasks. Our administration checklist. So, that should be 8.0. We've ensured that the most updated student portal is downloaded. We have gotten test tickets, tips pages, and we know when we're administering and kind of have thought about how we're going to schedule those testing. So there's a great checklist for you that walks you through. This PowerPoint is that alternate assessment IEP stuff that we just talked about and went over. So if you are getting ready to do an IEP or you're doing some internal auditing, pull this up and it will walk you through all those compliance pieces. Yes, is the Educator Portal on the Dlm website? Yep, we're going to jump into that shortly. Okay, required training. We talked about that you have to do that on your own. This will link you to the required training, and here's a guide to walk you through that. This right here links you to all of your essential elements for ELA, math, and science. Blueprints. Okay, pull these up, print these. These come into play when you're looking at curriculum mapping, but here's how else this helps you. How many of you, well, some of you might, but how many of you just have one student taking Dlm, right, in one grade level? Probably not too many of you. So Lee, okay, so you do. I do know that there's others. We heard from a couple others that have multiples, right? Where this comes in handy is we don't test every single essential element, right? It just wouldn't work that way. So we have created, all tests work this way. They create what's called a blueprint. So they work with content experts, fancy people like psychometricians, and they outline essential elements or standards that are tested in Dlm. So for example, if you've got third grade students, here are the essential elements that your third grade students are most likely going to see across all of their testing. So when thinking about where do I start with instruction, I would start with your blueprints. If nothing else, you want to make sure that your students have received instruction in all of these standards prior to testing. Where this comes really handy is, so for example, if you are teaching third graders and fourth graders, what you can do is pull these blueprints up, put them side by side, and look at where you have commonalities, right, in your essential elements that you could do some whole group instruction, do some vocabulary instruction, or where do you specifically need to target specific essential element instruction to individual kids. Okay, this really comes in handy with math. When you're thinking about math, I clicked on the wrong one. ELA blueprints. This also links you to those mini maps Tanya was showing you earlier, but math blueprints. right? You definitely want to make sure for the grade level that you're teaching, you've printed this and you've really hit on these essential elements and this vocabulary in your blueprint. Okay. In here, I also link you to those mini maps. So the mini maps that Tanya had showed you earlier, it will zip you right over to that page. You can print those mini maps as like a whole batch. You can print these out, put them in a binder, hand them to paras, use those for instruction. One thing here, see these gray flags? So these gray flags, we have two models in DLM. We have what's called the year-end model and an instructionally embedded model. We participate in year-end. So there are less essential elements in a blueprint in year-end than instructionally embedded. So wherever you see this gray flag, they're not assessed in year-end states. Does that make sense? So the cool part is they've given you these awesome mini maps for instruction. But what I would do is if I was teaching third grade, I'd go through and I'd print all of my third grade mini maps. And then I'd come through and I'd take my ones that have these gray flags and I'd pull them out and I'd stick them on the back end, right? So that I know that these are ones that are awesome bonus instruction that we do need to get to. But my focus, at least in the first part of the year, is going to be the tested essential elements for your end model. Does that make sense? Okay, so this here will also link you directly to those instructional pages that Tanya was talking about, where you can find familiar texts, testlets, the math is your glossary, and science. Okay, so that's what that one does. Here's the link directly to those modules that we looked at earlier with Tanya. And then here's some direct links
Explain what
to
those testlets are. Those testlet, does that give you just example testlets or does it show you all the testlets? Like, can you go deeper into what those testlets are?
yes, I just, yeah, one sec, you bet.
Perfect.
This next column walks you through your manuals. So we talked about the test administration manual. You can click right here, access it, and go to those outlining pages. Here's how DLM manuals work. Within your table of contents, so for example, I need to read before beginning assessments, right? But I also need to read my spring assessment. I can click here and it'll take me automatically right to it. Okay, so that's how the manuals work. So I've linked directly to those, but let's look at Educator Portal Guide really quickly. I know that this lady at the stage told me that I have to fill out this first contact survey thing, but I can't remember what I'm supposed to do with that. So here's where this manual is really awesome. Managing student data. Oh yeah, there it is right there. If I click on first contact survey, it's going to bring me here and it's going to walk me through step by step what I click on and where I go to an Educator Portal to fill out my student's first contact survey and P&P. Okay, so this manual, take note, write down Educator Portal User Guide. Okay, let's go look at this really quickly. So we had talked about tips pages, right? So those are test information pages that come down for every single testlet. I believe it's on this one. Sample tips pages. Okay, so in your resource page here for ELA Math and Science, you can go into this testlet tab. You can go pull up some released testlets. So if you want to see what a testlet looks like at distal precursor, what they've done is they've created kind of some PDFs of like what it will look like for your students. So this walks you through, this is a retired testlet of exactly what happens with your student. And this is what it looks like on the screen. So there's your story that the student reads, and then you'll come down, and I'm sure I'm making you dizzy. And you'll come to this page that this is the end of the text. Now read the text again and answer the question. So this is really good to practice in school. And then you'll see your comprehension questions become embedded within the second reading. Okay, another key. All of your comprehension questions will be in Word form. They don't come with pictures. You cannot add pictures, right, to these tests. Your students have to indicate their answer by presenting the text information. Does that make sense? Okay. You can't take away answer options for students, right? Like you have to present all of the answer options for your students. If you have students that may be only choosing right now between 2 answer options at a time, write this down. It's a strategy called partner assisted scanning. The best way to look up what that is and how to do that would be Google it, to be honest with you. But what you would do is you would present answer option 1 and answer option 2, right? Your student will choose between those answer options, and then you present their chosen answer and answer option 3 to get your final answer for what they choose. So if you have students that presenting 3 options at a time is going to be difficult, start practicing kind of how you're going to incorporate all that.
Okay, hold on. I'm so confused. So you can't give a picture option,
Nope. You
but you
can't
could
have pictures.
sign it if it's a student, like so if there's a kiddo that can't read.
Then you read it to them. So you would present, so
Okay.
you would read to your student, right?
Okay.
What can doing your best in school help you do? Can it help you drive a car? Can it help you reach your goals or have a lot of friends? So we've also seen teachers that have associated, we went out and watched at a school where the teacher had index cards and they were labeled A, B, and C, or like 1, 2, 3. And the first answer option was always associated with A, the second one B, and the third one C, and students chose their answer by touching the index card. Does that make sense? You can rewrite your answer options on a dry erase board. You can go through and do yes, no, right? So Johnny, what can doing your best in school help you do? Can it help you drive a car? Yes, no. Can it help you reach your goals? Yes, no. Does it help you have a lot of friends? Yes, no. Right? So they can answer yes, no. And if they answer yes to 2 options, then you'd repeat those 2 options. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I was there with you for that, so I just wanted to clarify for the group.
Yeah. But what you can't do is take these answer options and like plug them into a board maker, right? That produces picture symbols. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's one thing with ELA. All right, so you can look at the various testlets. I definitely think it would be worth your time to navigate some of these initial precursor testlets, but here's your tips page. So every testlet will get a tips page. The reason why it is really important to look at these is 1, the first thing it does is when you get delivered your testlet, it will tell you whether you're not at an initial precursor level, distal precursor, and it will also give you the essential element that the student's being tested at. Okay, it's going to tell you whether you're teacher administered, how many items my student is going to see, and then the materials that I need. So that's why it's really important. You can choose to print these. If you print them, make sure you destroy them when you're done. But at the very least, you need to access and look at these because you need to know if you need to bring any materials into the testing session. Does that make sense? Okay. It's going to talk to you about how you'll use the materials. It's going to tell you the DLM text that you're using and whether or not it's familiar. So when Tanya was showing you all those familiar texts in those resources that you can look at, the expectation that DLM has is that you're using those texts throughout the year for instruction. You're probably not going to ask the exact same comprehension question though, right? But your student is familiar with what's happening with that text. Okay, so that's why these are really important. If we look at a computer delivered tips page, here's an example of what that looks like. So it'll tell you it's computer delivered. This one's being delivered at the target level. It's a reading information. My student's going to see 4 items. I don't need any materials. Nothing suggested there. and follow your state's guidelines for supports. So here, because it's at a target level, so the idea is this may be unfamiliar. So it's a text that the student maybe hasn't seen, right? That you didn't instruct on, and because it's at a higher linkage level. So do you see why those are important? And you've got the same thing for math in Testlets here. You can preview Testlets, and then you can look at some example tips pages. Here's a teacher administered Testlet. These usually come down at initial precursor level, right? So it's teacher administered, which means I'm going to log in on Student Portal under the students login, and it's going to pop up some guidance for me on how I'm delivering the Testlet. You need 8 napkins, 6 pencils, and a rubber band. You can substitute objects, for example. So it also then tells you how we're going to use these materials. The student will use the materials to recognize set and separateness. So, and it's also going to tell you here what is vocabulary that is used, separate and part, which means that's what it's going to ask them. And it's also going to tell you words that you cannot define, right? Separateness and group. So do you see how that glossary kind of ties back into this and really helps you with vocabulary and understanding vocabulary that your students need to know? Okay, so you can substitute the objects. So it gives you some suggestions here. So really 2 sets of 5 or more objects that can be bundled, stacked, or grouped, right? 7 cups, 7 erasers. So you could use tiles, you could use counting bears, things like that. Where applicable, use a rubber band or string, because what you're going to do is they're going to ask the kids to like bundle them, right? To bring them together in a group. So does that kind of help give some background on why those tips pages are so important? Okay. What you cannot do is open up the Testlet, go see what it's going to ask you, close it, get your materials, and then test the kid. And I've seen that happen. So that's why these tips pages are there for you. Okay, cool. And here's some release Testlets. You can look at it, you can pull them, play with them with students, all of those things.
Hey, Tracy, how far in advance can you look at a tips page?
Once they're delivered. You can't look at the tips page until it's delivered. And you look at one at a time. And as soon as you've delivered and submitted that Testlet, that it all disappears and the next one delivers down. So, okay, perfect. Next thing, practice activities and release Testlets. So I suggest you log in and go through some of these yourself as a teacher. It gives you an idea. But then you can also sit down and do some of these practice activities with your students. Okay.
Tracy, how long do you have to give the Testlet once it drops down and is available? Do you have to do it in one day or?
Nope. So here's the way that works. So if you, let's say you go in tomorrow or next week and you complete the first contact surveys and P&Ps on your kiddos and submit that, what happens is on March 14th, when that window opens, the morning of March 14th, your first Testlet delivers, and it will sit there until you deliver it. Okay. So what you can do is you can pull your tips pages, right? Prior to testing, a week before, a night before, whatever you need to do, you can get in and look at those tips pages and gather your materials and do what you need to do and prepare yourself. But so just remember that if you fill out a first contact survey now and submit it, right, whatever you put in there is what that algorithm uses to determine your linkage level of your first Testlet. So I suggest if you fill those out now, I definitely, sometime in beginning of March, I'd revisit that and make sure, right, that still fits the kid. Sometimes our kids are gain skilled. We also do have degenerative components, right? So you may have kids that have maybe lost skills too. So that's really important. Once that first contact survey is done and your Testlet's delivered, you're stuck, right? Until you take that first Testlet and then your algorithm runs from there. Great question, Jen. So if you want to do practice testlets, here's how this works. You want to pull up this guide because you use demo logins. Okay. So what you don't do is sign Johnny into his account. You'll see the blue button that says practice, but there's nothing there. It does not deliver down like individual practice testlets. You have to use these demo logins to get in. Okay. You can do these practice testlets as many times, as often as you want. And once you get in there, you can also choose linkage levels to practice at for your kiddos. I think they maybe refresh those practice testlets like once a year, right? So just note, like if you go to do a practice test this week, you're probably going to have the same one next week. Does that make sense? Okay. So those are really good things to look at. Okay, I've linked you here to some additional Padlets. Now what you guys are gonna do, and what time do we end?
So it's 3 o'clock. We have till 3:30. I gave you till 3:15. And we talked about 3:15 to 3:30 for questions.
Perfect. I think that'll be good. Okay, so what I would like you guys to do at some given point, go back through. We've zipped through a lot of stuff really quickly today. So go back through, read through that PowerPoint again, look at some of this stuff, familiarize yourself with the Padlet, and then what you can do is go in and fill out this survey, and it'll ask you a couple questions in there. And at the end, when you submit that, it will automatically deliver you a 2-point relicensure certificate. Okay. So hopefully this Padlet becomes a great link for you to just pop you into all those fantastic things. So what I want you to do, if you have Educator Portal to log in, please do so. If you don't, that's okay. And I'm going to log in under a demo account, and we're just going to walk through a few things directly in Educator Portal. Let's see. Assuming I can get this. All right. So if you can log in with me, that's great. If not, you can totally just watch. See if this works. Fingers crossed. No. Well, that's not helpful. Yay. Okay, awesome. So when you log into Educator Portal, the first thing that's going to pop up, and I've probably gotten in here before, will be this security agreement is the first thing that pops up. So what you have to do is read through those questions, mark that you agree to the security standards. If you don't, then you can't administer the test, but then you'll click save. What happens is save pops up this thing. It doesn't go away. You can then just close that. So this is what Educator Portal looks like. You'll have your teacher role up here. It will show you your school that you're within. Some of you out there have multiple roles. So if you have multiple roles, you can go up here to role and toggle between roles, whether it's a district test coordinator, a teacher role, or if you have multiple schools you're assigned to. So just be aware of that. Okay, how do I go find students? So settings, right here, right? We'll walk you through students and rosters, and let's see if anything's loaded. Yay, we have a sample student in here. So when you get into students or rosters, here's a trick with DLM. It will pull up and populate your district and school for you. Always click that search button. That's what then filters in your stuff. So you will see your students, if you have them in and rostered to you. You have your state identifier, their name. This is kind of how you can get to first contact survey and PMP. It will tell you whether you're in progress, not started, submitted, completed. I think it says completed is your status. You can also access P&P. So anything in here that has that blue link on it, right, is like a hyperlink, and it will link you into the next page. So students that previously were in DLM will have all of their first contact survey and P&P information saved from year to year. Okay. So if it says in progress, there's a great example of it, right? That means that there's information. What you have to do is you need to go through and double check all of your information in there and make sure it still fits the kiddo. If it's a new student, right, you would go in and then fill in all of this information, right? Where are they at, and all of these things. But what you do here is you then go through all of this information. What is their sensory capabilities? It's going to make me indicate here, no hearing loss. It's then going to walk you through some vision stuff. Okay. If you have students that are low vision or blind, please shoot me an email so that we can navigate what you need to do for those kiddos. Okay, then you're going to go through and you're going to fill out some of these motor and health components, right? How does my student perform tasks, right? Maybe they only use one hand, maybe they use both hands, or they don't. Maybe you have a student that doesn't have any of those motor components. Any health issues, we're going to say no. So you'll go through and answer all these questions. If they're already filled in, please do review them and make sure that they fit the student, in your opinion, to the most accurate. So my student here can access it, use with student support or human support, right? They use a standard keyboard. So maybe fleeting attention. So when you're filling these out, I want you to put your assessment hat on, right? Once you go through training, you'll have seen some example testlets. You can go preview some of those release testlets. So when you're filling this out, think about some of those things that you've seen in testlets, right? And put that assessment hat on. So if my student is going to access this assessment, right, that's how I'm going to kind of fill this out. Does that make sense? So you go through and you fill all these things out and you get to communication, and we're just going to, for sake of time, plug a bunch of stuff in. But when you get to the end, so it's going to ask you communication, language, and you'll get into some academic stuff. And then you'll get to this complete status. So once you get to complete, you'll see where you actually have to click. I think it's like submit or complete survey. And that's what prompts that your first contact survey is completed. Once that's done, your status here will change to completed. Okay. This is where I want to go do my P&P. So if I know that my student maybe needs magnification or they need some color contrast change, I can look at that. Does my student need Braille? Okay, spoken audio. So I do want the ability for my student to listen, right? Have that speaker button. I wonder why it's not going to let me. Oh, spoken audio. So I'm going to click spoken audio, and then I want text and graphics or just the text only. If you have students that are use scans or switches, as in like switches to control a computer, please email me so we can chat. So I'm going to fill those things out. And other supports. So I also want to be able to read to my student, right? And my student may need a calculator if allowable. So you can put in those things. There's that partner assisted scanning that we talked about for students that may be rather low and we think we need assistance in how we're presenting options to them. Okay, so those are P&P settings. So now what you'll see is if this is custom, when you get in and you see custom here in P&P, I highly do suggest that you go look at it for each of your kiddos. Almost every training that I have done in previous years, when teachers get in, they go, oh my gosh, Sally has Braille marked or Sally has sign language marked and she doesn't use that. So definitely make sure you look at what's been indicated in there. This will tell you if your students are rostered to you and your grade level. Okay, so that's how you check student information. Sometimes your students may be rostered to you for one subject, but not another. So if you go to that roster, it will also pull it up. You can go pull up your individual rosters here. So like for science, and it will tell me my kids that are rostered to me. Okay, so you can go look here and say, oh, hey, I've got Craig or Perry rostered to me for ELA, but he's not rostered for me to math. Those are things that your district test coordinator can help with, or myself. What we see happen a lot of in charter schools is if those students are not enrolled in essential elements with you, they may be enrolled in like a resource course or a gen ed course, they get rostered to those teachers. So if you do and you go and you get in and you see no students, you need to shoot me an email or your district person and say, hey, I'm not seeing students. We've started doing DLM loads. We've only pushed a couple. We've had some IT issues and I have not done a DLM load in about 2 to 3 weeks. So just keep that in mind. We're hoping to be able to get a load done the first week after Thanksgiving. So let us know. How students get into DLM is dependent upon in your SIS system. There is what we call a 1% flag. So whether that's Aspire, Power School, I don't know what SIS systems are all out there, but somewhere in that student information system will be a flag for each student in their SCRAM record, which is their special ed record, that you mark a button that says alternate assessment participation. Once that is marked on those kiddos, that information comes through UTREX to us, and that's how we know those are the students that we're supposed to load into DLM. Okay. So if you get in there and you say, oh my gosh, I only see 2 of my 4 kiddos, because I think there was someone that had 4 kids. I only see 2 of my 4. Go check and make sure you have that 1% flag set on those other kids and make sure you're submitting their special ed record too. And then that's how we get kids in and out of the system, is that 1% flag. Okay, manage tests. So when it comes time to take the test on March 14, or if you set up an instructional planner, let's see if this will let me in. So what you'll do is it'll filter in stuff and you'll click search and it'll drop in a test session name. So it'll usually have the student's last name. And then when we were looking at those tips pages, it'll usually plunk in some of this information. Okay, back to Educator Portal. So you'll see your test session name. This ticket, it'll be up, you'll see a little PDF box. That's your test ticket. So you'll pop that up and it'll give you that student's username and password. And then your tips information page will pop in here. Okay, so that's that PDF. You should technically see ELA, math, and science for all of your kiddos 4th grade and up. If they're 3rd grade, you'll only see ELA and math. So if you get in here and you find that you only have ELA and you're not quite sure where, I think our kid's name Perry, you're not quite sure where Perry's math is, that's where you can go back to that roster too and make sure that you have all of your students rostered to you, right? But if your students are all rostered to you and you're missing them, sometimes there's some glitches and things won't deliver down. Contact me and we get with DLM to get that fixed. Okay, the other thing in test management that is super helpful. So we talked about all those 24 to 36 testlets that your kids will see, right? How do I know how many testlets my kids have and where am I at in testing? This test progress, once it populates, what it will do is it will tell you, right? Perry for ELA will have 9 testlets. Perry for math will have 7 testlets. So you'll see a 1 out of 7, 1 out of 9, 1 out of whatever their number is. And then as you complete your testlets, right? And your student completes a testlets and submits it, that first testlet drops out and your next testlet will drop in. So your testing progress will come about for you. So next time you get in, you'll see, okay, now you're on 2 of 8 or 2 of 9. Does that make sense? Okay. Please, in your student information, this is really imperative. in your student information, so you can click on your student here and view it. Please check all of this information on your kiddos. The information that gets loaded on students is the information that you have in your student system that gets sent to us. I only know as much as what is submitted to us. Please check the grade level and make sure that's correct. I have had where they had the wrong grade level and SIS systems on several kids. They got to the end of the school year and all of a sudden we got a red flag that a kid's grade level had changed. We contacted the LEA. Oh yeah, we realized that they had the wrong grade in there all year long. They changed it at the end of the year. Well, guess what happened? Those kids took all of their testlets in the wrong grade level. And we had to reset everything and they had to start all over. So it is imperative, please make sure that your student information here is accurate. Okay. You can also get to the P&P and first contact survey in through this student view record also. Okay. Reports, let's see if they have anything in a demo account. So if I go into reports, I can go to the student report archive. What's our kid's last name? His was not Perry. Hold on, I gotta go look.
It's Craig.
Thank you.
Perry Craig.
Thanks. So you can plug in your student's last name or their SSID number. If I spelled Craig right. No records. They didn't load any. Anyway, so you'll plug in your student's last name. If they have any previous DLM testing, all of that will drop in and it will be for the life of DLM. So it will go back to, when did we start DLM? 16, 15, 16? So they'll all drop in if they've previously taken. Okay. So, but you can't access that until students are rostered to you. There's some data extracts in here. You can explore those if you want, read in the manual. I don't know how important they really are to you as a teacher. You can pull up your rosters. You can get like a whole P&P setting or first contact survey. It comes down in a big Excel sheet. So that's up to you. My district people that are on, by the way, you in your accounts and data extracts, you have this DLM administration monitoring that you can do. You can pull up that and look and monitor your teachers. Who started testing? How many have they done? Who still needs to do testing? So that's kind of a good monitoring for my district people that are on. Okay, I think that quickly wraps up. And I know I went a few minutes past. Educator Portal. So you don't have to do it now, do it at some point, but that kind of brings us to the end. What is one thing that you learned about today that you will use in the classroom next month? It can be from Tanya's training, my training. So as we're doing some questions and thinking about things, please pop that in the chat or put in a sticky note. And that brings us to questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Tracy. It's late in the day, but we are here for you. So I did get a question from Daniela in the chat. Is the opt-out form the same as the one for RISE, or is there a special opt-out for the DLM?
Oh, it is the same one. Oh, go. Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. Okay, let's talk about opt-out really quickly. So on that parent opt-out form, it has all of the assessments listed on there. So they do need to indicate DLM, and it should be by subject level. Okay, if you have students that are opting out, I'd first ask the question, why? Like, engage in those conversations. We're using this instructionally. It's tied to our essential elements. I won't get on my opt-out soapbox, but here's what needs to happen. If you have opt-out, you still have to go in and complete the first contact survey, because you submit that participation code of opt-out. Your district people do, not teachers, district test coordinators. We'll go into test management, and it probably won't show it here because I'm logged in as a teacher. But what you do is you have to submit the first contact survey because you have to have a testlet to deliver down. And in that testlet, district test coordinators will scroll all the way over to the right, and you'll have a box here that says participation code. And that's where you'll mark parent opt out, right? Or if, for example, you've got a student that like has chronic absences, and let's say they just never got tested, you will indicate that there. So you have to go through the work and submit that first contact survey. There's one other thing that I wanted to say, and I lost my training of thought. Parent opt out, first contact survey. Oh, okay. A student is considered a participant upon completing one testlet. Okay, so a student completes one testlet and they're counted as a participant. However, they will deliver down a score report, but anywhere from 3 to 9 items on a testlet, you get a score report. It's not going to give you very accurate mastery information, right? Where they are proficiency. So just keep that in mind. Depending on the number of testlets your student actually completes is going to play into like, right, the reliability of that score report, if that makes sense. Okay, awesome. How do you report grades? How do you report grades in your EE classes? So like,
I mean, I mostly am encountering people doing pass fail if it seems appropriate to report grades.
oh, like that kind of grading system.
That's what I'm assuming. Pass fail is what I see typically.
I didn't. I gave my kids grades. I gave them grades. I put in assignments. Some schools are moving to standards-based grading, right? You have the opportunity to evaluate where your kid is, right, on those EE standards. So I think it's totally going to vary. I gave grades, and I gave grades on assignments. So a lot of it was more participation type oriented things, right? But I did do grades. So I think it just depends on what your admin wants you to do.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing that I haven't added to my Padlet yet, I'm working on right now. We've had a couple of LEAs that have shared with us. This is kind of a one-off from that question. But I'm coming up with a way to sort of monitor your kids on how they're doing in each standard, in each essential element. So you can look, like you can say, I will give a shout out, Utah Virtual Academy is the first place that I saw them do this. So they've listed all the standards for each grade level, and then sort of, whether they've come up with a really good way of indicating what linkage level they're on, if that's appropriate. And then, first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter, how they're sort of matching up there. And I think that's a good way of tracking that you've at least, had them access the standard, and then also sort of how they're doing in the standard. So again, it's a little one-off of the grading, but I don't know, Tracy, I've listened to Tracy give this DLM stuff so many times, and it still overwhelms me every time. So I'm really glad that we're recording this, because I'm hoping that y'all I'll put it on my Padlet, she'll put it on her Padlet. We'll also just send you the recording. So you're like, okay, I kind of remember sort of something. You can skip to the part of the recording where she's like, and then go here, and then go here, and then go here. I think that will be helpful.
Yeah.
Other questions?
I probably won't put the recording on my Padlet, only because my Padlet is being used as like training across the state. Does that make sense? But you can always reach out and we can get that recording to you. And the cool part is you can, like, Tanya links to my Padlet from her Padlet. My Padlet links to her Padlet. So it's a lot of interlinking, which is awesome.
And we're trying to keep those updated. So as you're using them, if you see something that you think we're missing, any suggestions, like, we want to make sure we have current and, sufficient and helpful information. Oh, Leah wants to know, what is a Padlet? So this is a Padlet, Leah. It's wonderful. So this is one of our greatest resources that we've learned in the last few years. So Tracy has her Padlet up. It's a link that anybody can basically go to, and you can see here, Tracy has sort of like in sections put, here's Utah guidance, here's national guidance, here's, web pages, here's additional links. Like it's just really wonderful. I have found it very helpful. So when people ask me for support in certain areas, I can say, oh, here's my Padlet, look at this, and then let me know if you need more information. So I think mostly it's just like a way of resourcing or of housing resources.
So it's actually, so it is like a website. So I think you can do, like, you can get a free Padlet account and it allows you up to like 3 to 5 Padlets. But yeah, it's just padlet.com.
Mm-hmm.
And you can, so it's kind of an app, but
yeah, and you can do, like Tracy said, free. You can do up to 3. And so
sign up for free. You can install it Windows. Yeah, and it's just a pretty cool. It's a place that we've really, you know, as we've not really been able to go out and do regional trainings, it's been great because in essence, right, everything, like I used to print all of this stuff, right? And I'd come to my regional trainings with this big folder of all this stuff. And now it's just right there at the tip of your fingers and you can bookmark it and access it. And then I just go in every year and update it with new links and updated information. So it's really cool. It's a great resource.
other questions, you can unmute or just put them in the chat, either way.
And it was so much information, right? A fire hose. I always get, I hate to bother you, or I'm wasting your time. Please don't ever feel like you're wasting our time. Please don't ever feel like you're bothering us. Like, if you have questions or concerns or wonders, or you're just not quite sure, please reach out, because we would rather make sure that you get your information from Tanya and I instead of somebody else out in the field. So please don't ever hesitate to reach out with anything.
Well, and again, I would say that I could have talked for a full day on my resources and instruction. So if you want more, reach out to whoever, or if you're the person that makes those decisions, let me know. I think once we've gone through this portion, you don't have to do any kind of further training request. So I'm happy to do it at a time that works for you. So how do we receive training hour credit for this training? So Tracy has indicated that she has something that you can do through her Padlet. Usually I leave it up to LEAs to kind of provide that. But I should do something similar to this on mine, so that if you just kind of go through and look through it and answer some questions, I can make sure and do that as well, so you can get some credit.
So we know that we had you longer. So mine is only a 2-hour credit.
Yeah, we had you 3 hours. Yeah.
Yeah, it gives you 2 relicensure points, but you can go in and fill out the survey, and it will automatically, once you submit it, it will automatically email you a certificate.
Tracy's gonna school me on how to do that, so I can get that to you guys as well. Anything else? You guys have been awesome. Thank you so much. I know it's Friday. It's like it's fall in Utah, so it seems like it's 8 o'clock at night, but it's really only 3:30. Please reach out with further questions. We're really happy to have had you guys here today. And I know there's always more than what we gave you, but we'll do everything we can to help you keep serving these kiddos. So we really appreciate you guys. And I know, I can't remember, Scott, you wanted to stay on. We'll stay on and chat with you for a few minutes if you still need that.
If you don't have the Educator Portal account, or you're not quite sure, shoot me an email. We'll get that taken care of. And then also in my Padlet, in the PowerPoint at the very end, has both Tanya and I's email addresses, if you forget how to access us. Okay, awesome.
Thanks all.
Cool. Hey, so awesome. Thank you for the training. So you didn't answer my question. I thought that I missed the part about the DLM. So that was my big question that I had. But I think I'm good. I did send all of my stuff to Tracy. I did send the email, and are we going to be able to have access to this to review later? Like, will you email it to me, or how does that work?
Yeah. So again, I believe I sent to all of you guys, but I can double check some links. So one was my Padlet, one was Tracy's Padlet, DLM website, and there was something else. Oh, who is a student with significant cognitive disability. My training and Tracy's training are on our Padlets, at least our PowerPoints. I will put on my Padlet the recording that we're doing right now.
Okay. Awesome.
Which I'm gonna stop.
And then I was pulling, so I think probably what you missed was just simply the first couple slides.